remembers what we were talking about in the last lesson when we're talking about the causes of the World War, which we gave an abbreviation MAIN, MAIN, right? And who remembers what M represented?
Militarism.
Great. And then we had A. A represented what? A,
Alliances.
alliances. And we had I. I represented what? We
Imperialism.
had imperialism. And then we had N. N represented what?
Nationalism.
Nationalism. So that's what we were talking about in the last lesson, whereby we're giving like more detail to those things and trying to explain like what was really what were the causes, like what caused and the meaning of those words, so that we could be familiar with them, right? And we try to define each and every one of them so that you guys can understand. So in today's lesson, we're just going to go through like a background of the World War, like we're also going to talk about the important dates that we should remember, and like the background of how the whole thing started, the immediate causes of the war and things like that. So before we start, maybe someone can read for me these two paragraphs quickly that I have highlighted. Maybe Cindy can read for us. Cindy,
Okay, ma'am.
thank you. You can go ahead.
World War One, WW1, also known as the First World War, was a global war centered in Europe that began on 28th of July 1914 and lasted until the 11th of November 1918. The war lasted exactly 4 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Before World War II began in 1939, World War One was called the Great War. The World War, or the War to End All Wars, 135 countries took part in World War One, and more than 15 million people died. See the fact file below for more information about World War One. World War One was a military conflict lasting from 1914 to 1918, which involved nearly all the biggest powers of the world. It involved two opposing alliances, the Allies and the Central Powers. The countries of the Allies included Russia, France, British Empire, Italy, United States, Japan, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, Greece, Portugal, and Montenegro. The countries of the Central Powers included Germany, Austria and Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. The WW1 facts listed on this page are amazing and very interesting when you consider that the events happened in very recent history.
Okay, thank you. So this is just to introduce like when the war started. So we are told that the war began on the 28th of July 1914. Those are important dates that we should always remember. So, and it lasted until the 11th of November 1918. We should also remember that. So we are saying that the war lasted for 4 years. That's a long time, eh? So we're saying that the war lasted for 4 years and 3 months and 14 days. So we are saying that before the World War II began in 1939, World War One was called the Great War, right? But when the World War II started, then when the World War II started, then it became the World War One, right? So the World War, or the war to end all wars. So there were about almost 135, or should I say 135 countries took part in the World War. There were a lot, right? And more than 15 million people died. That's quite a big number, right? So these are the people that died. So we are also told about the allies. Remember, in the last lesson, we were talking about the alliances that we're talking about. And so now we get to know the countries, or the actual countries that were included in the allies, like the countries of the allies included Russia, France, British Empire, Italy, United States, Germany, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, Greece, Portugal, and Montenegro. And then the countries of the Central Powers included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey and Bulgaria. So we now get to know how the countries were grouped themselves. So now we want to get to know like the World War One fact, right? So I would ask someone else to read for me under World War One facts, like the way I'm going to highlight up to here, and then we can move on from there. Who can read for me there quickly? Rowan, would you mind reading for me?
Yes, ma'am. Everything that's blue.
Yeah, exactly.
World War One triggered on June 28, 1914. World War One was triggered on June 28, 1914 by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his pregnant wife Sophie. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and heir to the throne of Austria and Hungary. The assassination was planned by a group of by a Serbian tourist group called the Black Hand. The man who shot Franz Ferdinand and his wife was a Bosnian revolutionary named Gavrilo Princip. The primary cause of World War One was a difference over foreign policy. Although the assassination of Franz Ferdinand triggered World War One, that was only the immediate cause. Differences over foreign policy between the major world powers was the underlying cause of World War One of the war. World War One had many causes. A tangle of alliances made between other countries to maintain the balance of power in Europe, which brought about the scale of the conflict. The Bosnian crisis, where Austria and Hungary took over the former Turkish province of Bosnia in 1909, angering Serbia. Countries were building their military forces, arms, and battleships. Countries wanted to regain lost territories from previous conflicts and build empires. The Moroccan crisis, where Germans were protesting in 1911 against the French possession of Morocco. World War One was known as a number of different names. Other names for World War One include the War to End All Wars, the War of the Nation, and the Great War.
Thank you, Rowan, for great reading. So yeah, so we were just talking about more facts on World War One. So fact number one, we're talking about like what World War One, like one of the immediate causes of the World War One, and we say that it was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his pregnant wife Sophie. So this is one of the things that was like immediate, caused the war to start immediately, right? So the assassination was planned by a Serbian terrorist group called the Black Hand. So this was one of the things that like made the war to start immediately. And then we also have a primary cause of World War One was difference over foreign policies. So we're saying apart from the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, there was also the issue of differences over foreign policies between the major world powers. So it was also another cause, and as something that also caused the war to start immediately. Then World War One had many causes, right? Apart from these, apart from the ones that we talked about, it had many causes. A lot of things caused the World War to start. Like there were a lot of things, problems, and things like that. I think I indicated it in the last lesson. I was trying to explain about the causes. So number one, a tango of alliances made between countries. I think we also talked about this when we're talking about alliances, how alliances caused the World War to start. And then the Bosnian crisis, where Austria-Hungary took over the former Turkish province of Bosnia. I think when we're talking about this, we're talking about imperialism, where countries wanted to expand their territories and wanted to expand their powers. I think this is what we are talking about. And then countries were building their military forces, arms, and battleship. So we are also talking about militarism on this point. And then countries wanted to regain lost territories from previous conflicts and build empires. We are also talking about imperialism when you're talking about this, whereby countries wanted to regain lost territories from previous conflicts and things like that. And then the Moroccan crisis, where Germans were protesting in 1911 against the French possession of Morocco. That's also another cause that or another thing that we could also talk about. So World War was known by a number of different names. So other names for World War include the War to End All Wars, the War of the Nations, World War One, and the Great War. Those were the names that were actually given to World War. So it had a number of names. So you should actually be able to you should know these names, right? You should just know that, okay, these were the other names for World War, so that you don't get confused if you are told about the war to end all wars. So I would ask someone to quickly read for me here, maybe up to here, and then we can continue in the next lesson. Yeah, talking about the remaining information. Who can read for me? I would ask Hein to read for me. Hein, you can go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
In 1915, the British passenger ship Lucentia was sunk by a German submarine. In all, 1,195 passengers, including 128 Americans, lost their lives. Americans were outraged and put pressure on the U.S. government to enter the war. President Woodrow Wilson wanted to peaceful in the war, but in 1917, when the Germans announced that their submarines would sink any ship that approached Britain, Wilson declined that America would enter the war. The restored peace of Europe, the United States' entire war on April 6, 1917. 8 million soldiers died in World War One and 21 million were injured. 65 million troops were mobilized during the war. 8 million troops died and 21 million troops were wounded. 58,000 British soldiers were lost on the first day at the Battle of the Somme. Chemical weapons were first used in World War One. The chemical was mustard gas. The United States only spent 7.5 months in actual combat. The US was in the war in actual combat for only 7.5 months, during which time 116,000 were killed and 204,000 were wounded. In the Battle of Verdun In 1916, there were over 8 million casualties in 10 months.
Thank you so much. So we are talking about the like the we're still talking about the causes, and we're still talking about probably the major what do you say, the major, like the background of the war. They're saying the American joined World War I after 128 Americans were killed by a German submarine. Right, that's another thing to note. And then 8 million soldiers died in World War I, and 21 million were injured. Right. And that's also another thing that also happened. And the United States only spent 7.5 months in actual combat. That's also another thing that we should note. So I will continue in the next lesson to explain about the remaining points that we're also going to be talking about. So let's continue in the next lesson. We'll continue talking about that. So do you guys have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Anyone who has a question? Rowan, Hein, and
No, ma'am.
Cindy, do you
No,
have
ma'am.
a question? Aiden, is everything okay? Okay. So if you guys don't have a question, we can call it a day and meet again in the next lesson. You guys have a great day. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye.